In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, I'll be showing you how to play Wyll in Baldur's Gate 3 if you want to make him into a true Blade of Frontiers. To do this, I'll be multi-classing Warlock with Fighter, and I'll explain why that is in this guide. I'll also cover ability scores, class features, equipment, and I will provide tips on how to get the most out of Wyll when playing this way. Being a Warlock, Wyll is a very versatile character. He has some spellcasting ability, can use melee weapons effectively if he wishes, and has a fantastic ranged attack and Eldritch Blast. However, Wyll is the Blade of Frontiers, so for this build, I decided to lean into that persona and multi-class him with Fighter. By doing so, he gains a fighting style, action surge, medium and heavy armor proficiency, and extra attack that stacks with the Pact of the Blade's extra attack, and he still gains 3 feats, and this is a very feat-hungry build. These things help better set him up for melee combat as a true Blade of Frontiers. Since Wyll begins Baldur's Gate 3 as a Warlock, his ability scores are in line with what a typical Warlock might have. However, you will want to respec him eventually to get the most out of him, and this will allow you to save valuable feats on ability improvement when they are needed elsewhere. You can see that we've evened out many of his abilities to provide more benefit, especially with Constitution, which will not only give him more HP, but help him pass concentration saving throws. We've also made sure he can get +2 armor class when wearing medium or light armor by rounding up his dexterity, which will improve his initiative as well. Wyll has proficiency in animal handling and survival for his background, so you cannot change these. However, ideally when respecing Wyll, we take 1 level of Fighter before taking a level of Warlock in order to have Constitution proficiency, which helps with concentration saving throws, as well as provides him with some armor proficiency. This means ideally you'd select Persuasion and Intimidation so that he can handle dialogues effectively. Acrobatics is a good solid third choice since it helps prevent Wyll from being shoved, but you could select Athletics for the same reason. I like to keep my companions at least the class they begin the game with in Baldur's Gate 3 since it feels like that's how Larian intended for them to be played, and it's no exception with Wyll. However, because fighters have Constitution proficiency and medium and heavy armor proficiency when selecting them as your starting class, it is a better fit for this build. For this reason, when you respec, make sure it's Wyll's first level chosen before picking Warlock second. We get quite a few things from selecting Fighter first. Medium or heavy armor is what you want Wyll to use with this build since he won't have very high dexterity. You also have better concentration saving throws since his Constitution will be added when calculating it, and Warlocks have a lot of concentration spells. Wyll will also gain a fighting style. There are a couple of good options here. Defense just gives him +1 to armor class flat, which is nice. Dueling gives him +2 damage when he's using a one-handed weapon, even if he uses a shield. And Great Weapon Fighting can significantly boost his damage as well as prevent the need for the Savage Attack or feat if you don't mind less armor class. Any of these 3 are acceptable. Since you can't respec until you're at least level 2 anyways, you'll be able to keep Wyll as a Warlock even if it's a second class by taking Warlock immediately after selecting 1 level of Fighter. We'll take 5 levels of Warlock in a row here in order to pick up the important Warlock aspects for this build. At level 1 of Warlock, Wyll will be taking the Great Old One subclass. This is because he will gain access to Mortal Reminder, which makes it so when Wyll critically hits with a weapon or spell, target and nearby targets must make a Wisdom saving throw or become frightened. We have a huge focus on critical hits with this build, so this will trigger often. Wyll will also gain his first Warlock spell slot, which replenishes after short rest, and will get to select 2 level 1 Warlock spells. I suggest taking Armor of Agathis and Arms of Hadar. You won't end up using these all that often later in the game, but you will use them early on before you've gained Darkness. And finally, Wyll gains Eldritch Blast at this level, giving him a reliable ranged attack every round. He will rely on this a lot until he reaches level 3 and gains Pact of the Blade, since you'll have poor melee accuracy until that point. Note that Eldritch Blast gains an extra beam at character levels 5 and 10, so multi-classing does not hurt its effectiveness. At level 2 of Warlock, Wyll will get to select 2 Eldritch invocations from a list. I highly advise taking Agonizing Blast, which will boost the damage of Eldritch Blast by Wyll's Charisma modifier and applies to each beam of Eldritch Blast. And also selecting Devil's Sight, which will allow Wyll to see inside the Darkness spell, which he will gain at the next level. At level 3 of Warlock, Wyll will gain a second Warlock spell slot, and both spell slots will increase to level 2 spell slots, meaning they can be used to cast level 1 or level 2 spells. He will also gain access to Warlock level 2 spells, allowing him to select Darkness, which is vital for this build. Darkness blinds enemies within, which automatically makes attacks against them have advantage, while blinded enemies have disadvantage on their attacks. And since Wyll has Devil's Sight, he can enter the darkness and not be blinded, using this to his advantage as long as he maintains concentration on darkness. This is why Fighter at level 1 comes in handy, in case he does get hit while inside, which can happen. Also at level 3, Wyll will get to choose a Pact boon, and we will be selecting Pact of the Blade since Wyll is the Blade of Frontiers after all. This allows Wyll to summon a melee weapon and use his Charisma modifier for attack and damage rolls with it, or to bind any weapon to him, allowing him proficiency with it and to use his Charisma modifier for attack and damage rolls with it. This allows Wyll the flexibility to melee or Eldritch Blast each turn with the same effectiveness. At level 4 of Warlock, Wyll will get to select his first feat. Here I highly recommend selecting Great Weapon Master. This will allow Wyll to use his bonus action to make another attack if he kills an enemy or critically hits an enemy with a melee attack. He is more likely to kill than critically hit at this point of the game, but it will become more useful when his critical chance is higher. Additionally, if he is using a two-handed weapon, then he can gain a huge damage boost as well, and the hit chance can be somewhat offset by the advantage he gains while attacking blinded enemies standing in darkness. Wyll will also gain a second beam to Eldritch Blast at this level, making it outperform his melee attacks until the next level of Warlock, so you will likely once again rely on it here for a short stretch of the game. At level 5 of Warlock, Wyll will gain level 3 spells, and his Warlock spell slots will improve to level 3 spell slots, allowing him to cast level 3, 2, and 1 spells with them. Hunger of Hadar is not a bad choice here, but it doesn't work the same way as Darkness, so Wyll is not effective inside of it. Wyll will also gain an extra attack from Deepened Pact at this level of Warlock, allowing him to melee twice per turn in combat with his Pact weapon. This does stack with the extra attack from Fighter, which will give him 3 attacks at Fighter level 5. And finally, he will gain one more Eldritch Invocation, and I highly recommend selecting Repelling Blast in order to make the beams of Eldritch Blast knock enemies backwards. This can often result in their death if knocking them off a cliff or high elevation. After taking 5 levels of the Great Old One Warlock, it's time to switch back to Fighter to pick up many benefits from it and the Champion subclass. At level 2 of Fighter, Wyll will gain Action Surge, allowing him to perform a second action in combat. This allows him to cast Darkness and then attack twice on the same turn since you'll have the extra attack from Warlock. This will eventually be 3 times once he gains extra attack from Fighter. At level 3 of Fighter, Wyll will get to choose a subclass. I've selected Champion here because it reduces the number he needs to roll in order to critically hit with both Eldritch Blast and melee attacks by 1. This is roughly a 5% increase to critical hit chance, but since we typically attack with advantage, it's closer to 10%, making Wyll's critical hit chance when attacking with advantage close to 20% at this point of the game. Note that this affects stack, and we'll be using equipment to help increase this further. At level 4 of Fighter, Wyll will gain a second feat. Here he will either take Savage Attacker or Ability Improvement depending on what fighting style you chose for him. If he's using Great Weapon Fighting, then Savage Attacker is not needed, and you should select Ability Improvement for better accuracy and damage. If Wyll is using Dueling or Defense, then Savage Attacker is the play here. Note that Savage Attacker applies to all damage rolls made when making a melee attack, even those added by equipment, critical hits, or sneak attacks, so it's very important to this build if not using Great Weapon Fighting. At level 5 of Fighter, Wyll will gain extra attack, allowing him to attack 3 times in combat when using his Pact weapon. This can even be 4 times if he critically hits or kills an enemy with his melee attacks, which is a huge amount of attacks. Also at this level, Wyll's Eldritch Blast will add a third and final beam, allowing him to hit 3 different targets or attacking the same target multiple times. Remember that each beam has its own chance to critically hit, and that enemies hit with it can be frightened thanks to Mortal Reminder. At level 6 of Fighter, Wyll will gain a third feat. With it, he should select Ability Improvement and take Charisma up to 18 or 20 depending on what feats he selected before. This extra feat comes in very handy for this build, and should not be overlooked. At level 7 of Champion, Wyll will gain Remarkable Athlete Jump, allowing him to jump 3 meters further, and will also gain Remarkable Athlete Proficiency, allowing him to use half of his proficiency bonus when making Strength, Dexterity, and Constitution checks he is not proficient in. Initiative is one such check, so he will gain Improved Initiative, +2 at this level, allowing him to act sooner in combat. When it comes to equipment, Wyll has the option to use either medium or heavy armor thanks to his starting level in Fighter, and one that I like for this build is the Dark Justiciar Halfplate. This is a medium armor that provides advantage on stealth checks while obscured, but also advantage on Constitution saving throws, which is essentially the equivalent to having the Warcaster feat for all intents and purposes. This armor also has incredibly high base armor at 16 for medium armor, giving Wyll a total of 18 armor class just for wearing it because of the +2 to dexterity. A good alternative is the Adamantian Splint armor, which has the same armor class but reduces damage by 2 and prevents critical hits. Critical hits are often one of the few ways Wyll can get hit while in darkness, and this armor prevents that. For choice of weapon for this build, I really wanted to try to stick to some sort of bladed weapon since Wyll is the Blade of Frontiers. Weapons that work well with this build are any that add an additional damage type that can roll, since this will be improved with Savage Attacker or Great Weapon Fighting, and doubled with critical hits. However, there are a couple of exceptions that help increase our critical hit chance. Some that I have found to work well are the following: Knife of the Undermountain King, Thornblade, Kerwin's Cauterizer, Balorson Blade, Sword of Screams, Crimson Mischief, and Charge-Bound Warhammer. Knife of the Undermountain King is an exceptional weapon for this build because not only does it reduce the number you need to roll to critically hit by 1 for all attacks, but it also applies a similar effect to Great Weapon Fighting, re-rolling your damage dice if they are 2 or lower for your attacks. This can remove the need for the Savage Attacker feat if you use this weapon. Charge-Bound Warhammer is also exceptional for this build, though it is not a blade. It deals an additional 1 to 6 lightning damage if pack-bound, which it will be, allowing you to really crank the damage. It can also be 2 or one-handed since it's a versatile weapon. The Dread Shot is also great for this build in the ranged weapon slot since it further reduces your crit number by 1 even when not using it at all. Consider slotting it on Wyll if you don't have an archer in your group. If you're not two-handing, then you will most certainly want a shield. Some good ones are Justicier's Great Shield, Safeguard Shield, Iron Banded Shield, and Kethric's Shield. Justicier's Great Shield allows you to create darkness around you for 2 turns as a bonus action and is a great way to lead off combat. Iron Banded Shield has high armor class, and Kethric's Shield has some nice bonuses as well. Since we're using our bonus action to make a normal attack, there is no need to dual wield with this build unless you want bonuses of the second weapon. When it comes to accessories, Dark Justiciar Helmet is perfect for this build. Not only does it boost concentration saving throws, but it also reduces the number needed to critical hit by 1 while obscured, further boosting critical chance while in darkness. Covert Cowl is a solid alternative if you don't have this one, though less effective. Cloak of Protection is excellent for this build as it adds +1 to both armor class and saving throws. Not a must, but very nice to have. Dark Justiciar Gauntlets are a nice addition as well since they add necrotic damage to your weapon attacks and boost strength saving throws by +1. Flawed Helldust Gloves or Helldust Gloves also work well, so consider using either of these if you don't have the Dark Justiciar Gauntlets. Evasive Shoes are nice for the added armor class, but you can really use any shoes you want for this build. They are one of the least important parts. For Amulet, there aren't too many good ones for this build, unfortunately. I'm using the Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet, but you can really use whatever you like here. For rings, there are a few solid choices: Strange Conduit Ring, Shadow Cloaked Ring, Ring of Twilight, and Ring of Arcane Synergy. Strange Conduit Ring and Shadow Cloaked Ring are my go-tos since they add rolled damage, which can be increased via crits. Ring of Twilight adds armor class, and Ring of Synergy can boost damage if you strike with Eldritch Blast first, and then attack afterwards using Action Surge or on the next turn. Final tips. The general strategy with this build is to go in turn 1 and drop Darkness in the middle of as many enemies as possible, and then pop Action Surge and then begin mailing them to death. You can use your second spell slot to reposition Darkness as needed if ranged enemies or casters move out of it. Keep in mind that you can use Eldritch Blast from inside the Darkness as well to attack enemies outside safely. Try to maintain advantage on all of your attacks, as this will drastically increase your chances of critically hitting enemies, which will further boost your damage. Action Surge and Warlock spell slots both replenish with short rests, so be sure to do this between combat when possible. It's also not a bad idea to have a bard in your group that can use Song of Rest to allow you to do this even more before needing to long rest. And lastly, the Favorable Beginnings Tadpole power is great to have on Wyll, really any character, since it further helps with his hit chance, especially if he's using a two-handed weapon and Great Weapon Master. Great Weapon Master makes it easy to miss, and anything you can do to help hit chance is a good idea. This only requires 1 tadpole to use, so it's a no-brainer on this build. You'll just have to convince Wyll to use tadpoles first. So that wraps up my Wyll guide. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I really tried to come up with something that really embodied the Blade of Frontiers. I know there are probably more powerful Warlock builds out there, but I really like the way this one came together, and the focus on critical hits is not something that I began doing when I first started making this build. That I sort of steadily lean into as I started to see the damage numbers rack up, and I think it works really well. If you guys have questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section.